Welcome to On Cloud, the podcast for cloud professionals, where we break down the state of cloud computing today and how you can unleash the power of cloud for your enterprise. Now, here's your host, David Linthicum.
Welcome back to the On Cloud podcast. Today on the show, I'm joined by Lamont Orange, Chief Information Security Officer at Netskope, and also Chris Jackson, Managing Director, Technology Leader at Deloitte Private. How you guys doing this morning?
Doing great, Dave.
Great.
So
doing great.
I'll go to you, Lamont, first, and tell us your story. How'd you get to where you are now, and what's your background like? Listeners love those kinds of things.
I have taken a non-traditional path to CISO. I think most of our folks in our position have not had a traditional path because you can take many paths to get here. My path started with a company by the name of ServiceMaster, where I was a programmer. And that led me over to my consulting experience. And from there, I wanted to go into industry. And industry led me to Charter Communications, now Spectrum, where I was the vice president of enterprise security there. And from there, since I've done consulting, I wanted to go into a package security company and work for a security products company. So I went to WebSense, where I was the CISO there. And we were acquired by Vista Equity Partners, and I became the CISO for Vista Equity Partners and Vista Consulting Group. And now in my current role, I am the global CISO for Netskope.
You've had quite the career. So Chris, give us your background.
Sure thing, Dave. I've been a variety of places. 10 years Air Force in the Medical Services Corps. I came through Deloitte through an acquisition and spent time in building up their mid-market and private company business, formerly known as Deloitte Group Enterprise Services, now known as Deloitte Private. Focused on a number of areas in Deloitte, but my background throughout the career has largely been technology, strategy, and emerging tech.
Wow, also impressive career. So you guys recently did a survey, and I love these kind of podcasts because I get to learn something, and I also get to learn current information as someone who does a lot of podcasting, a lot of blogging, a lot of public speaking. You know, this is fuel for that, the ability to kind of look at what the new information is out there. So Chris or Lamont, who would like to kind of describe how the genesis of the survey, what it's about, and then we'll talk about the findings.
Yeah, I'll kind of kick off and give a little bit of context. So we've been doing, this is our 9th survey, but I created a Midmarket Technology Survey focused on spend, adoption, use of technology within the mid-market. That's defined clients $1 billion in revenue, typically early stage and early growth clients. And it's typically a C-suite survey. So we get good insights on what's happening in the marketplace, in this segment of the market, certainly, as well as things that will become. And this year's survey was particularly interesting because there's a lot of things that we did not expect to see that showed up in the survey that show that not only is the mid-market important and it's growing in a very differentiated manner, it's actually doing some things that, quite frankly, may be slightly ahead in some cases of some of our much larger enterprise clients.
So what was the general take and the findings? And we'll talk about things specifically. Who would like to address that, either Chris or Lamont?
I'd say that I'll take a shot at that because after reading the survey, you're really looking at how technology is pacing with the innovations that the companies are going through, whether it's AI or whether it's modernization of an IT and operations stack, or just how security leaders are leading forward to be able to adapt to the vast changing landscape of security.
So how is spending going? Since the pandemic, everybody was spending crazily. And, here we are in 2023, people are talking about an economic downturn. What did you find in terms of how people are spending money on IT?
Yeah, I think it's been very interesting, particularly relative to this survey. So we've been seeing a cohort of companies spending, upwards of 5% of total revenues for several years. And those are the companies that were, early stage, kind of along their cloud journeys, along their cyber journeys, and doing things. But this year's survey, we asked a few questions, and we asked some questions kind of differently. We took a look back saying kind of, what did you invest in last year? Did you get a return on that investment? Was it impactful to the organization? What are you investing in this year? And what specifically will you invest in the next 12 to 18 months? So we asked a series of questions to kind of give us ROI, true return in value from that investment standpoint. And it was there that we saw some very interesting trends. Overall investment, so the folks that were historically spending 5%, slightly above that in terms of total revenue, in some cases were spending up to 10%, sometimes higher than that, which indicates that they are clearly getting demonstrable return on their investment value. So they're doubling down on tech and getting true value from that. Because keep in mind the size of these companies, they don't have the budgets of our larger enterprise clients. So in many cases, they're placing some pretty critical and material bets, and they're very comfortable with those bets. And within that context, a cohort of those are clearly progressing forward and are much more mature than we would have thought.
So, Lamont, are you seeing the same thing in the company you're working at and the industry in general?
Yeah, I say yes. I think that's very fair focus. And even with some of my colleagues and peers, we talk a lot about the different areas where we have to place those bets and what we're expecting from a capability component. Again, that's we're building platforms and foundations that will allow us to scale to what's coming.
I'll go back to you, Lamont. What about spending on cyber and security? Where is that going? Is it flattening out? Is it increasing? Is it increasing moderately or exponentially?
So from my view, I'd say is absolutely increasing. Industry-wide, I would say it's probably increasing at a moderate pace because we're still in a state of modernizing our technology platforms. We live now in both cloud and hybrid worlds. So that's an additional investment because many of the tools won't do both. So you have to start to look at how do you gain the better economies of scale with the tools that you're purchasing and where you're placing those bets, because the goal is to do it with one platform, one tool to gain some efficiencies. But we're at a point now as the companies are moving very, very quickly to reinvent themselves that we have to, as technology leaders, get out in the front of that and become somewhat of now the business leader versus the technology leader.
So, Chris, how are companies that responded to the survey managing security risk? Is it just through investment? Is it through modernization of technology? Is it training? Is it all of the above?
Well, I think they're taking an all of the above approach, and the cohorts that were most progressive are their responses were they're very pleased with their cyber investments, particularly around their operational investments. But what was interesting from the survey, Dave, was when you looked at how pleased they were and how progressive they were relative to their journey along the curve of adoption and transformation. When you looked at where they put the dollars, it became really interesting. So a lot of the investment that I would have expected to see, and we've historically seen, typically have gone into kind of cloud, supply chain, customer-facing technologies. The bets that they were placing for this next 12 to 18 months was very interesting. The highest area of investment, and we'll talk about them relative to AI, which I think is the topic du jour this week, where folks were investing large amounts in AI. That was the highest level of investment by the folks that were surveyed. And it was interesting because the investment area in AI was cyber, an area that many of them felt that they were fairly comfortable with. So I was laying the groundwork for something that we didn't expect to see based on that level of investment. But when you see it with the second area of greatest investment, which was actually IT operations, and you step back and look at that, that indicates that these folks are along their cloud journey. They're really starting to leverage and capture some of the capabilities that are there within the fabric from the big three cloud players. They are advancing and starting to gear up proactively. Keep in mind that they're saying that they are doing well now, but they're investing heavily. So they're gearing up proactively for what I believe is an incoming flux of AI-bound threats to the environment. So they are proactively preparing and investing to counter those threats. So we're reaching a point where we're going to be AI against AI from a defense standpoint. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing out there as well. So in other words, people are investing hugely into AI, specifically generative AI-based systems, and modernizing existing systems that can benefit from AI. But security becomes even more of an investment you have to make because, number one, you have a multitude of data that has to be leveraged for training and the outcome data of the AI systems. But also, when we're finding this, it started happening in some of the events I've seen over the last 6 months. Hackers are out there weaponizing AI against these systems. In essence, it's kind of spy versus spy scenario. So it depends on who's going to have the most smartest, proactive AI system that's going to win the game. Lamont, what are your thoughts on that?
I think your view is absolutely spot on. I would say in the early days of AI, when it first was introduced and we look at all the benefits and we had all the consumerization going on, from a security leader standpoint, the first thing that we thought of, how do we block this? How do we save the data and keep it from getting into this model? And now I'd say many of us are quickly advancing to how can we use it? We want to understand how to make our teams more efficient. How can we leapfrog where the business is going and be there with the right data, the right systems, the right telemetry, and get them protection while they're innovating on the different platforms that the business wants to do. So I would say that this is definitely something that we need to embrace. And we need to also look at it as how we move our resources, our team members, up higher in our execution stack. Because anything that's repeatable, anything that can be done over and over again, anything that can be applied to multiple platforms and systems, we probably want to use AI to surface the information to the human and let the human make the decision at that point.
Yeah, it's a downside of the commoditization of this technology. Certainly AI is much cheaper and much better than it was just a few years ago, and certainly with cloud computing to thank for that. But the reality is it pops up different threats as well. So it's really going to be a natural progression of spending on security, whether you're into AI or not, just because of the changing attack vectors that are out there. So, Chris, backing up a bit, what about investment in the latest tools and the latest technology? Are companies just throwing tools at these issues? Are they thinking strategically about it? What's their take on improving security?
Well, I think at this segment, given the size of the companies and many of them are growth oriented, they don't have the luxury of broad pilots as many of our enterprise clients do. So they're placing some heavy bets, and they're very focused bets on some areas. And so we're seeing acceleration within the edge, proactive tools, and things along those lines. But what's interesting when you start to look at that and consider the pace of change relative to AI, and when you can contrast that against the historic things we've seen around cloud transformation, the advent of cyber broadly through an organization, this AI cycle, Dave, as you and I have talked about, is going to be much, much quicker. And it's going to require a different set of lenses to make sure that folks are prepared for the investment that's going to occur in that space. And when we look at the data, we see folks that fall into a couple distinct groups. Those that are clearly proactive in their approach, those that are trying to get there. And the thing to take away for the audience, it's very important to understand that to do AI effectively, you've got to have a sound cloud infrastructure in place. You've got to have your hands, a good handle on the data and how to really leverage that data before you can even effectively begin to really drill down and get true demonstrable broad enterprise value around AI and ML collectively. So the investment we're seeing is laying the groundwork to support those things, in some cases being proactive where they're looking at threats from a different perspective. And let me give you some context around that. So when we think about that, another survey finding we saw was that many of these clients are approaching this where they're looking for growth outside of their industries and or sectors. So the lines between industry and sector are blurring clearly. And what's happening, some of these folks are investing because they see growth and opportunity to expand into another industry or sector, which brings along a whole set of challenges when you think about that through a regulatory lens. If I'm a consumer organization getting into the healthcare space, the reg structure is very different, and how I handle that from a security standpoint is very different. So you're seeing that advent, but then you're also seeing in some cases organizations where folks are coming in and they're taking market share from other folks. So think about it in the context of, shopping and holiday shopping. Everybody's presented with these kind of bots that come in and say, hey, do you want to spread the payment on this thing? Well, that's typically not a bank. That's oftentimes a TMT tech company that's doing that. So they're grabbing market share from the financial services space by solving a tech problem. So the investment we're seeing is going towards proactive growth, and then much of it defensive for inbound threats to take market share.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is exactly what I'm seeing in the market, big and small, because the big players are more likely to be disrupted than the smaller players because they can't respond as quickly. They're not as agile. And the mid-market can make more aggressive investments in leveraging AI as the ability to provide better customer experience, better revenue opportunities, and the ability to get to an innovative state. And that's where the value is coming from as we're looking at these businesses. It's not as much how much we produce and how much revenue we get from production, but the ability to have an innovative differentiator that's really going to take us to the next level. So one of the things, Chris, I'll go back to you, that I saw in the survey I thought was interesting. Midmarket Tech survey respondents highlight that they are overwhelmingly confident that they have the tools in place to move into adjacent industries. Is that something I'm probably not seeing in the Fortune 100? Is that because it's mid-market?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think, one, you're placing bets that matter more because you have less dollars to kind of play around with. So they're very strategic and very tactical in terms of how They are spending and investing. And there's this cohort that I've talked about that really is doubling down in some areas where they're spending upwards of 10 to sometimes 15% of total revenue on tech, which shows that they are clearly getting some demonstrable value, whether through its growth within a sector or not. So I think that's one of the elements. I think the other thing that we're seeing is that, they are getting a good handle on the fact that, security is pervasive through all things. One of our findings that was really surprising is that 7 out of 10 of the organizations surveyed, when asked, stated that they had an asset internally in the organization that they believe they could monetize externally to drive additional revenue growth for the organization. And that's a level of maturity that we didn't expect to see based on the number of respondents that kind of came back with that answer.
So Lamont, how is Netskope developing software ultimately to respond to these trends?
When you look at what Netskope is doing out here to help the security aspect of this and what we found in the survey, Netskope is focused on being that centralized brain of how you access user to app, securely access user to app, no matter where you're coming from. We're also dealing with how you operate in the hybrid platforms, as well as just in pure cloud as companies are continuing to innovate. You talk about monetizing the data and new services and solutions. Well, most of that's going to reside in the cloud, and it's going to have some sort of B2B user to app connection. When you use all of your tools, the legacy tools are now being moved to cloud as well. So customers are going and your workforce users are going direct to cloud, and you have to secure those transactions. So you also need to incorporate some of what's going on in the endpoint, what's going on in your identity provider space. And when you look at what Netskope is providing, we are a leader in that space, and how we provide the integrations and we provide the connectivity to the access the right asset at the right time, no matter how you're accessing it.
So I love it. This is ultimately something that we need. We need understanding, we need expertise, and also we need the right tools to make it happen. So I'm going to ask you both the same question. Chris, I'm going to go to you first. What about this survey changed your mind and outlook in terms of where you thought the industry was versus where the industry is actually going? What did you see that was kind of your aha moment?
Well, I think there are 3 things that just stood out for me significantly. One was the evolution of industry and sector convergence is much further ahead than we would have expected within the mid-market space. So the lines of sector, as I mentioned, in industry are blurring materially, and they're largely for reasons of growth and expansion. So that was one that we did not expect to see. 2, the other one that surprised me a bit was the sophistication of a segment of these clients that had been investing over 10% of total revenues, where they were on the maturity curves, and the need, implying that there was a need for a different type of provider. We asked a few questions around that. So how folks show up in the traditional sense, again, integrator partner, the software partner. These customers need something that's a bit different. They need providers that, can work together, that can jointly invest, that can see things on the horizon, that are actually developing tools and deploying things in a real-time manner. Because when you look at the maturity and pace of change in the tools, it's not necessarily keeping up with the pace of change with technology and AI. So there's some tools that are actually well there and vendors that are positioning themselves and moving very quickly. And there's some that are slower along the curve. So for your audience, it's important that they think about the partners that they're using. Can those partners scale? Particularly when you look at cross-industry and cross-sector opportunities, that brings along a whole different set of regulatory and technical challenges to consider there. And the tool sets and partners matter. People that can understand the various industries and the regulations within those industries need to partner with the tech vendors to make sure that they're thinking about those things and can handle them appropriately. So there's a broad changing of the landscape of partners that really I took away from that finding in the survey. And I think the last thing, Dave, was interesting for me is the number of folks that were creating an internal asset that they could monetize externally for growth. Did not expect to see that much in this segment of the market. They're thinking about growth. Growth's important. They're doubling down on their investments. I believe, and what I've taken away from that survey finding was that, a lot of these folks have this sound cloud foundation in place, and there are lots of tools that are woven into the fabric of the major players that allow people to accelerate some of this innovation and piloting.
So Lamont, same question. What did you find in the survey that was kind of unexpected and kind of net new information you didn't expect was coming?
One thing that really stands out from the survey is that we're still having some conversations around talent and how we are looking for the right resources, or there's a resource shortage, or we need to reskill. So we're still having those conversations. And some of the comments led me to believe that, hey, we're looking at AI maybe to solve some of those challenges, which I think is a great use case. And I didn't realize how wide a group would embrace that. So I think that's a positive for our industry, again, when we talk about how to make us more efficient. I think the other component was around modernization. So we went through the digital transformation stages or phases in industry. And now when you look at modernization means how do we monetize data? Modernization means how do we modernize our IT and operations organizations as well? Because if you think of digital transformation, that truly disrupted more of the security side of it. As you move toward more cloud, I'd say deployment, innovation, modernization aspects of it, now you're getting into disrupting some of the IT and operations organizations. And it was really interesting to see how some of the survey respondents are starting to double down in IT operations as a spend as well.
So, Chris, what about talent when it comes down to this? It seems like a lot of this stuff and technology deployment becomes around the skill sets that you can find or able to develop. How did it affect what you found in this survey?
Yeah, our results came back and it showed that there's they're pulling all the levers relative to talent. We're taking non-traditional talent in different ways we have. So the degree-based versus certification-based training becomes valuable to a lot of folks, which opens the market up to a whole host of practitioners that can enter. So I think we're seeing some very innovative things there in talent. The other things I think when you look at AI specifically are that there's still some talent concerns or AI-related concerns around talent in terms of employee resistance, the perception of AI, customer perceptions of AI as well that we need to think about in terms of how we drive trust in an organization, how we really leverage AI to augment behaviors. So I think we're still early along the educational curve, but the data shows that, organizations are doing whatever they can to retain employees, to reskill them, to apply different types of employees to the equation through certification to meet the needs of the business.
So, Chris, we're going to put the link to the survey in the show notes so people can find it. But what about yourself? Where can we find more information about you on the web?
I could be found at LinkedIn under my name, Christopher Jackson.
So, Lamont, where can we find out more about yourself and your company?
Sure. You can please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And also you can find out more about Netskope on netskope.com.
Why don't you spell that for us?
NETSKOPE.com.
All right, check it out. Check out the survey. Check out Lamont's company. Check out the gist of what this information means, because I'm really surprised. Some of the stuff wasn't surprising. Some of the stuff was surprising. And I think as practitioners in the marketplace, as consultants, people who are implementing this stuff, we have to understand what emerging best practices are occurring around us in the industries, and in surveys like this that really kind of help us get to the point in terms of targeting what everybody else is doing so we do it right ourselves. So if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to like us, rate us, and subscribe. You can also check out our past episodes, including those hosted by my good friend Mike Cavas. Find out more at DeloitteCloudPodcast.com. All one word. If you'd like to contact me directly, you can email me at dlinthicum, LINTHICUM, @Deloitte.com. So until next time, best of luck with your cloud journey, and you guys stay safe. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to On Cloud for Cloud Professionals with David Linthicum. Connect with David on Twitter and LinkedIn, and visit the Deloitte on Cloud blog at Deloitte.com/US/Deloitte-on-cloud-blog. Be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, go to Deloitte.com/about.